Between the blue skyline over the Vosges and the Black Forest, Alsace is situated like an island set between two continents, one Latin and the other the Rhine. Vineyards naturally found their place here on the long and narrow hillsides that stretch for hundreds of miles. This small territory on the frontier between France and Germany inherited landscapes, soils, and a geology that are unique on the planet. For almost a century, Alsatian winemakers have been preserving this natural treasure, pioneers in organic and biodynamic farming before they became trends. The region's wine growers were already aware that the future of their vineyards depended on respect for the environment. Restoring natural biodiversity in the vineyards is a daily struggle here. And the new generation of winemakers is going even further than their elders by inviting new populations of animals, insects, trees, and plants to take their place in the vineyard. The result is the birth of a new and vast biodiversity on these parcels, and it's clearly bringing great benefits to the vines.
No one's home. There's a bit of moss there. A tit started building its nest. It's under construction. That makes the third generation of tits this year. It's cool.
For generations, Jean-Paul Zouslan's family has produced renowned wines in this valley in the south of Alsace. On a hill surrounded by oak and chestnut forests, the nature-loving winemaker built a small, sheltered paradise. In Clos-Liebenberg, the vine is no longer solely responsible for producing great grapes. The entire environment plays a role. Birds, fruit trees, and plants have come to form a virtuous circle.
Here in Clos-Liebenberg, it's not just the vineyard. It's a whole environment that we modeled. There's the vineyard, but there's also a little orchard. We planted trees, hedges. We put nests in place. If we only had vines or just a single crop, we'd have more problems with the health of the plants, like with fungus or insect attacks. What we're trying to do here is to have as much diversity as possible, all while growing our vines. I'm going to see if there are any chicks in any of the other nesting boxes. We have nesting boxes all around. It's really interesting in the vineyard how the tits inspect their environment very carefully. A tit will inspect the vine, under the bark, under the leaves, in the grape bunches. She will look to see if there are any small butterflies, small insects, which she will feed on and feed her young with. So during a single day, she can collect up to 25 grams of insect. And it's great because for more than a decade, we haven't used any insecticides, not even organic insecticides.
Jean-Paul took over his father's work and passion. 30 years ago, Jean-Marie Zouslan was looking for an alternative to weed killers and pesticides that were damaging his soil. He was one of the first winemakers in Alsace to convert to biodynamics. This philosophy considers the plant as one part of a global ecosystem that the winemaker strives to maintain in a healthy balance. Today, this region uniquely exemplifies the biodynamics phenomenon in Europe, as all renowned winemakers have adopted it. Jean-Paul Zouslan wants to go even further with his father's methods. Hidden in a corner of the plot, far from view, he employs some very curious little workers. These bees do not pollinate the vines, and yet their role is essential. They carry pollen for the flowers and fruit trees that populate the vineyard.
They're buzzing. I love that smell. Winemakers today have another mission: to take care of their land, the plants, the environment, the health of those who work here, and finally, the consumer as well.
By preserving his wine-growing land, Jean-Paul is continuing a long family tradition that is widespread throughout Alsace. The history is present on walls and buildings. Along the wine route, villages with winemakers' half-timbered homes bear witness to a golden age. During the Renaissance, Alsace was a rich province of the Holy Germanic Empire. Its wines were treasured by Europe's most prestigious courts. Then came the 30 Years' War, and the Alsatians, who had become French, were left in ruins. They had to entirely rebuild their vineyards. That is the moment the Zeusland family settled in the hollow of a valley inhabited by vines in the small village of Vosges. Today, after his father's passing, Jean-Paul and his sister Marie care for the property. When I go to the vineyards, I love passing by this painting. It's our family tree. It's the long story of my family, the Zeuslands. In 1691, there was the marriage of Cicely Jodocus, our Swiss ancestor, who came from Oberkirch, a canton of Lucerne in Switzerland, to Barbara Vogel, an Alsatian woman who lived here in Vosges. That was really the starting point of the history of the Zeusland estate. There are no breaks. We are winemakers since the 17th century. The profession winemaker is marked every time, for every generation. My branch is on this side. My great-grandfather Jules is here. My grandfather Valentin here. He gave the estate its current name. He's painted over there. I recognize his eyes. He's with my great-grandfather Jules, my father, and Jean-Paul, my brother, who I work with. And I'll go join him in the vineyard now. Mary and Jean-Paul's deepest desire is to continue their family's story and pass on this land that they care for so much to their children. Their inheritance, the vineyards, the soil, and the ecosystem they live in form a whole. So if a species disappears, reintroducing it is very important to them. This is the story of the fragile wild tulip of the vines. This endemic flower was first seen in 16th century vineyards. Over the past 30 years, they gradually disappeared, victim of mass chemical treatments. Luckily, the naturalist Hubert Ott, well known to Alsatian winemakers, found some bulbs.
Hello, I was looking for you. How are you, Jean-Paul?
Hi, Hubert.
Hello.
Hi, Mary.
You brought us some bulbs?
Yes, I prepared some.
The project's taking shape?
Yes, here you see our famous tulip bulbs.
Excellent.
These will work for our experiment?
Yeah, it's very good.
So where are we putting the next one? Can it go in the sun there?
I know it doesn't look like very much now, but in just a few months they'll be in full bloom.
These bulbs that Hubert brought us represent a very special moment, because we knew these flowers very well when we were children. Our mother brought us to look at them. And in the center of the village of Bolenberg, there were large yellow areas of wild tulips that we could see from our house. We often went to see them, and sometimes we picked bouquets. But we tried to preserve them. So replanting these wild tulips here today is very symbolic.
I plant it like this?
That's perfect. I brought you this picture I took a few years ago that clearly shows the plant we have here. We can see how aesthetic it looks. It's slender. The wild tulip is particularly slender. Today it's a symbol of respect for nature, something that we've always practiced in Alsatian vineyards. And now we're reconnecting with our history and the tradition of natural beauty that lives in the vines.
All these plants will communicate with each other, and they'll form different structures, which will help retain water, which will create humus, and other different things. They'll give us a more stable soil, one which is healthier. All these things contribute to the natural balance of the soil.
When I have your wine in my glass, I'm holding a bit of this biodiversity, and it's illustrated by the wild tulip.
Hubert Ott has observed people's ecological consciousness grow on these hills. 20 years ago, 600 acres of noble land adjoining the vineyard were returned to nature and classified as a nature reserve. Thanks to this sacrifice, the fauna and flora that first developed here thousands of years ago can continue to prosper for the benefit of the vines.
Here we see a beautiful specimen, a beautiful grasshopper, characteristic of our hills. It's called the vine cricket. The interesting thing about the Epipigger cricket is not only that they're living here, but also what they show us. This cricket eats a little bit of everything. It eats plants, but it also eats insects and insect larvae. The Epipigger's presence in a cultivated plot tells the vine grower that they have a good predator of onerous pests, and that's very interesting.
These pest insects, which the Epipigger feeds on, attack the grapes and causes them to rot. By preserving this hill, winemakers provide themselves with a natural insecticide. Yet, the presence of these insects in Alsace is unexpected. The Epipigger usually lives in Mediterranean climates, but the hills of Bolenberg enjoy particularly hot temperatures. These are the legacy of the region's ancient climate history. 8,000 years ago, this was a temperate climate zone.
This hill is unusual. Though it's nestled in the middle of a vast vineyard, we have an unexpectedly Mediterranean landscape. It's our Alsatian scrubland. To everyone's surprise, we find species here that you would expect to find near Marseille. This image of Alsace is not very well known, but it's another reality of our region. It's a very important old chapter in our history because it shaped this hill and provided the conditions for the vine's great success today.
The vines owe this unique climatic history to the presence of the Vosges, which have always protected the vineyards. The mountains offer the liana, which love drought and heat, a natural barrier against winds and bad weather from the west. When it rains on the Vosges Mountains, 12 miles away as the crow flies, the clouds stop as if by magic over the vineyard, where it rains 5 times less than on the plains. It's a little miracle from the heavens. The mountains not only offer ideal climatic conditions to the vineyard, their geological history has also given Alsace a variety of soil types that are unique on the planet. Winemaker and geologist Yannick Mignot explains the origins of this source of wealth that is invisible on the surface. Specialists like her call it the soil mosaic. Once, there was a mountain range here. That was about 400 or 450 million years ago. This mountain massif was called the Hercynian Massif. It was completely flattened by erosion and then covered by the sea several times. This resulted in successive horizontal sediment layers. Then finally, 50 million years ago, a collapse occurred. This collapse cut the massif in two parts. Over there, we see the western part of this massif, the Vosges. And behind us, we have the eastern part of the massif, the Black Forest. Between the two, we have this collapsed zone, which is the Alsatian plain. On the frontiers between the massif and the plain, there's a partially collapsed zone, with small zones in the form of steppes, which in our jargon we call fractured fields. The vineyard is located between the mountain and the plain. This gently rolling area still bears the marks of these successive collapses.
Ce que l'on voit en face de nous avec Rigvir.
In front of us, we see Wigveer and Zellenberg, those parcels in yellow, blue, and purple here. On the plots, we will find different rock types on the ground, from one plot to another. Granite, limestone, marl, clay, shale, and sandstone. Alsace's geological makeup is incredibly diverse. In this small territory, we can find almost all of the existing soil types on Earth. Here we have a soft limestone that's extremely rich in iron, giving it this ochre color. And I have some samples of two other types of limestone, Jurassic limestones. The important aspect of these three types of limestone is that they allow us to express different characteristics in our wine. This is what gives birth to the notion of a terroir. And this notion of terroir is the only thing that is totally uncopyable in our profession. Grape varieties, viticulture techniques, oenological techniques, all those things can be exported and reproduced. But a terroir, meaning the conjunction between a subsoil, a soil, the climatic conditions, and winemaking know-how, that is absolutely impossible to reproduce.
C'est absolument inimitable.
Alsatians lay claim to a heritage of a unique soil, formed by an alliance of geology, a climate, a soil, and a know-how. One of Alsace's most unique terroirs has long been the symbol of its vineyards. The Rangen dominates the valley of Thann at the southern end of the vineyard. It is born of a dark volcanic rock, offered to the sun's rays on a vertiginous slope. It takes perseverance and a taste for hard work to bring forth this great wine. The slope here can reach more than 70%, making grape harvesting an exercise in precise techniques. When they're not rappelling, the pickers stay close against the vines. They must maneuver their baskets with infinite caution to prevent them from rolling or slipping on the pebbles. Carriers are replaced by crates pulled by winches. A second of inattention, and the precious harvest is endangered. Olivier Ambrecht cultivates several plots of Pinot Gris, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer on his famous Clos Saint-Herbin. These extreme harvests are a feat that Marie wants to experience for herself.
Bonjour Olivier.
Hi Olivier, how are you?
Tu vas bien?
Très bien.
Real good.
I'm happy. I'm happy to meet you here. I finally made it to see you harvesting.
I'm glad you forced me to come outside today, because during the harvest I'm usually in my cellar, in the dark, in the humidity, getting sprayed by water. I'm really happy to be outside on a day like this, in the field, because though harvesting is a very difficult job, in general this is what makes the winemaker the happiest.
In Alsace, Rangen is a special place, a unique place that we winemakers want to visit and contemplate. I come here from time to time to walk and observe this magical place. It's special. It's this view, the soil, the climate, the vines dating from the 60s. All the parameters here are unique.
Rangen is a place with a very strong energy. In general, all the winemakers feel it. In any case, the growers who are close to their soil and who work with respectful methods. It's a place that's always been cited in the history of Alsatian wines. Unfortunately, it was destroyed twice by the world wars. Very badly. The vines almost all disappeared. Only a few winemakers were left in the village. The town of Thann was a very large wine-growing town in the 17th century. There were over 600 acres of vineyards. Then the vineyards disappeared in favor of industrialization of textiles and other factories. But thanks to the writings, which go back a long way, winemaking remained in the people's imagination. And perhaps that's why there is this image, a little like a legend or a tale, which attracts people to this place.
Rangen's reputation began in the 13th century. Pilgrims came from all over Europe in search of a miraculous source. They passed through the St. Thibaut Collegiate Church in Thann, where they discovered a strong and powerful wine. Many stories were written about it. One of them tells how even the giant Hercules was caught by surprise by the strength of the wine. After drinking too much, he sank into such a deep slumber that when he awoke, he forgot his famous club. Convinced to have been trapped by evil forces, he never came back. Far from the strange forces that inhabit this area, Marie and Jean-Paul's vines are about to be woken up with an essential biodynamics ritual.
Magnifique là.
The early morning spraying of drops of a quartz silica preparation is intended to stimulate the plant's resistance by strengthening the epidermis of the leaves and the fruit. But for brother and sister, it is above all a precious moment to share. This morning is a special moment, and there's no noise, no one's around, just us two in the vineyard and the sound of the forest. Today we hear noises in the distance. It's mainly activities in the village that we can hear a little.
It's a magical moment. Everything is calm. There's no wind. At first glance, it seems like nothing's happening. But here on the edge of the forest, there are animals going back into the forest. From time to time, we see wild boar, or deer, or other small animals. And then there are the birds. They're coming out, and we can hear them all around us.
In this viticultural Alsace, a pioneering region in biodynamics, the Zuslin family are a source of inspiration for a whole new generation. For them, the preservation of harmony in nature is the only guarantee for their vineyard's future. I feel a responsibility sometimes. Of course, I want to do this well. I don't want it to stop with my generation. Jean-Paul and I want it to continue. But it must not feel like a weight on us every day. We have to live it fully, do things properly, and follow a lovely natural path. Today, we want to create something beautiful, to pass on to our children.